ourselves and show who we are to others by our stories. Our experiences, what we value, our orientation to the world, whom we love, where we've been, our dreams, are all carried in us in stories that can be shared when the moment is right in any encounter with another person, at work or at church or in our families or even waiting in line at the grocery store. They recall our births, draw the shape of our families, remember special celebrations, sometimes tragic events. They're a map that shows how we were lost and then how we were found. Some of our stories are about facing fears and even death. Our stories teach those who hear them about how we care for the earth and how we cultivate our gifts and share them too. We're drawn to the biblical stories just as we are to so many other kinds of stories because we glimpse ourselves or our loved ones in so many of them. Hearing them, we are reminded that we aren't the only ones who have parts of those stories in our lives. We have a lot in common. And today is a day when many of us are recalling and telling stories about the women in our lives, who they were, what they taught us, what we learned from them, what they see in us, the gifts they have given. And so as you sit and ponder the stories of the women in your life, I offer one of my own. 2 weeks ago, on Earth Day, I joined most of my immediate family on my mother's side for a special dinner at the Hart House to celebrate my Aunt Anne's 70th birthday. And it was just family, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, siblings, partners, and kids. And we sat in an upper room around a large square of tables in the big leather boardroom chairs that they have there. And we had to move carefully around the room, avoiding the low eaves and not tripping on the uneven floor of that nearly 400-year-old house. And once we were seated, it felt like a home where everyone could see each other clearly across the table. From my 2-year-old nephew to my 76-year-old Aunt Nancy. Some had traveled further than others to be there, and a few were missing, but the family was all gathered together at one big table, and we had great food, and we laughed as we told each other stories about Anne from over the 7 decades of her life. And I told one about her goofy lounge singer voice, which she occasionally broke into once in the parking lot of the Cleveland Ballet after we had seen the Nutcracker, and she was inspired to give us her own version of the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies, lounge style. So when we had finished telling our stories, Anne pulled out a small stack of note cards and proceeded to speak to each of us around the table in turn. On her birthday, she chose to give gifts to each of us. And in a way so befitting of her kindness and care for us, she looked each of us right in the eye and recounted what she knew of every one of us. When we first came into her life, who we are now, what gifts she sees in us, what she appreciates about our relationship, and what she knows to be true about how others know and love us. I can't speak for the rest of my family, but for myself, it was very moving. And I felt honored to be her niece and grateful to have yet another example from her about what love is, about receiving and giving the gift of yourself, about listening, and about what it means to say yes to your life, even though she, like the rest of us, has been through some difficult times over the years. Now, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is another woman who teaches us how to say yes to life and to God. Her song, which you heard David read and you all said aloud in a more modern version for the responsive reading, is a powerful testament about what saying yes to God can do. The kind of yes I'm talking about is not simply the yes of saying you'll pick up your nephew after school or you'll mow your neighbor's lawn while they're away on vacation. I'm talking about a yes on a higher plane. It's a yes that leads us into the interconnectedness of life, to encounters with people, both human and holy. It's the kind of yes that makes you a part of an us, the people of God whose love and power are beyond measure. Some of you may be feeling grateful for the relationships that you have or have had with your mothers, grandmothers, stepmothers, adoptive mothers, aunts, mentors, and others who have been a mother to you. Likewise, some of you may have mixed feelings about those same relationships, which can be challenging and sometimes even painful. It's up to you to choose who you remember on this day, but I suspect that all of us can see something of our own story in the larger story of Mary's song to God. Maybe some of you can recall when you were 14 years old and you remember what it felt like. You may remember that there were some things that made sense to you and others that did not. But that's how old Mary was. Maybe you remember how life seemed simpler back then. Or maybe you remember how life seemed harder back then. Were you happier? Were you confused? Maybe you can appreciate Mary's no-nonsense reply to God, and maybe you marvel at her bravery and courage. Maybe she reminds you of a child of your own, or a sister. I'll let you look for the connections to Mary's story, but she welcomed God into her life, and even more powerfully, love into her body, love whose only condition is to be received. That's what we just said in part of the unison prayer. Love whose only condition is to be received. Love with the power to transform, to illuminate, to strengthen even the darkest and most lonely places. Mary said yes, and it opened up her entire life. Now, in preparing for this sermon, I read some of the work by Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan monk and writer, who reminds us that great teachers and mystics say in various ways that you cannot truly see and understand anything if you begin with a no. Beginning with a no means that you quickly label things, you analyze them, you categorize them as good or bad. He says the ego strengthens itself by constriction, by being against, by reaction. It even feels loss or fear when it opens up to subtlety or growth or mystery. But saying yes involves a positive choice that brings an inner spaciousness. It makes room. It doesn't exclude. He also confirms what all of you know, that it's pretty hard to live this way, to say yes instead of no. It often takes a lifetime of contemplative prayer and honest self-observation to stop critiquing everything, something that if you're a Franciscan monk, you might have time to do, but for you and I, it's pretty challenging. And maybe that's why Mary was able to say yes. Mary was young, really just a girl, and maybe it was just instinctively that she knew to say, "Here I am, God, ready to serve. Let it be with me just as you say." And when the angel Gabriel came to Mary, who was an unmarried teenager, as you recall from the story, and told her that she would bear a son who would transform her life and the world, she did not respond with fear. Instead, she listened, wrestled with what she heard, thought about it, and replied, yes. Immediately, that set her on a path that would mean connection, responsibility, humility, solidarity, and love. And the story tells us that she went immediately to go see her cousin Elizabeth, who was also going to have a child. Now, this part of the story is really brief. A woman named Fran Furter, who wrote a book called Enter the Story, gives the following summary of the story of Mary and Elizabeth. And she says this flow of events was simple but potent. Mary goes with haste. She enters the house. She greets Elizabeth. Elizabeth hears Mary. The child in Elizabeth's womb leaps. Elizabeth is filled with a sense of the holy. She proclaims a blessing upon Mary. Mary responds. Entering, greeting, hearing, feeling, blessing, responding. That's it. The simple visit of these two women offers us a vivid example, though, of what the structure of a healthy, holy human encounter is. It gives us a glimpse of what can unfold when we meet one another on the inside. The words are few. The details of this biblical visitation are spare, but when Mary takes her leave, both of the women are more aware of who they are before one another and before God. They've claimed their voices have been heard. They are blessed. And that is what true meaning ought to affect in each of us every time we come together. Something in me resonates with this idea that it's in these very simplest moments of our stories that we can find the deep and lasting connections that allow us to take our leave from one another and return to the more mundane parts of our lives a little bit more changed. I borrowed Frankfurter's words for this sermon title, Holy Human Encounters, because I certainly long to recognize more of those kind of moments in my life. They are the moments when our yes to God is brought to life in encounter with another. And that's what happened between Mary and Elizabeth. It's a holy human encounter. It's what happened in the upper room of the Hart House when my aunt spoke to me and my family members. It could be when you talk to your child or grandchild about serving at LifeBridge. That could be a holy human encounter. It could be when your spouse, who thinks differently about something, tries to talk with you about it and you can just listen instead of react. A holy human encounter might be hearing the person in the pew next to you tell you about how their mom is doing. It could happen when someone tells you how tired they are, and you tell them that you know what that feels like, and you encourage them to take care of themselves. God is never more present in our lives than in the encounters we have every day, one holy human person to another. Telling our stories, creating new ones, responding to God with a yes opens up more connections than we can count or than we can see at the moment of their happening. It reminds us how much we need each other, how much we have in common instead of what divides us. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard Pope Francis's TED Talk. Has anybody listened to it? I highly recommend that you look it up online. Just Google Pope's TED Talk and it'll come up a bunch of times. Be sure it's in Italian, so get the one with the subtitles. The first 2 times I opened it, it was just in Italian, and obviously I had to look around. But here's part of what he said. He was speaking to the folks at the TED conference specifically, and he said, "I would love it if this meeting could help to remind us that we all need each other. None of us is an island, an autonomous and independent I separated from the other. We can only build the future by standing together, including everyone. We don't think about it often, but everything is connected, and we need to restore our connections to a healthy state. Even the harsh judgment I hold in my heart against my brother or my sister, the open wound that is never cured, the offense that was never forgiven, the rancor that is only going to hurt me, all are instances of a fight that I carry within me, a flare deep in my heart that needs to be extinguished before it goes up in flames, leaving only ashes behind." Many of us nowadays seem to believe that a happy future is something impossible to achieve. This is still the Pope talking, not me. While such concerns must be taken very seriously, they are not invincible. They can be overcome when we don't lock our door to the outside world. Happiness can only be discovered as a gift of harmony between the whole and each single component. So, what he was saying in this talk was that the future is made of yous, Y-O-U, and made of encounters because our life flows through our relations with each other. Martin and I, and the Pope for that matter, stand up in front of God and our community of faith week after week, trying to find ways to remind all of us that we're deeply connected. God created us that way. We are not separate from those who are not here, from those who are sick, from those who are scared about their health care, from migrants who face hardships we shudder to imagine. Pope Francis knows, as he encounters people every day, that we are not separate from prison inmates who carry a hell of pain inside their hearts, or from those who cannot find a job. And he says in his talk, I often find myself wondering, why them and not me? The reason it matters to come here and hear stories from the Bible or culled from reading and study that those of us like me who have the privilege of speaking to you can find is this. Every person on this earth is part of God's creation. We're all part of one whole. You and I are not more worthy than a family of, say, Chinese farmers who live on less than $2 a day. You are no better in God's eyes than a person in prison for life or a teenager who feels so confused and desperate about the place he finds himself in that the only way ahead that he sees is his own death. That happened in the Stoops family just this past week. Their nephew and cousin took his own life. Saying that we're all connected is not a platitude. It's a physical, emotional, spiritual, economic, social, and political reality. We are not separate, any of us. So what we do matters to every other person. God calls us every day to holy human encounters so that we remember our responsibility to other people. I hope that the women in your life have given you a glimpse of this truth. And I have no doubt that the men have too, and I'm preaching on Father's Day, so I'll think of that then. I hope they've helped you to realize your gifts and your growing places, the ways you have an impact on the people you love, on the people you have mistakenly ignored or do not see, on the people you incorrectly judge, and on the people you have not yet met. Whether you are blood of their blood or simply one among their beloved, may all the people in your life who, like Mary, said yes to God, who opened their bodies and souls for you to be carried in, literally and figuratively, who offered you a place to grow inside of them, be blessed, just as we are blessed to know them. Amen.